It all started when I came across Jane's profile on Twitter. Her comments were so witty and to the point that I couldn't help but respond. At first, we exchanged a few messages about some mundane things: music, movies, news. But just a few days later, our conversations became deeper and more personal. I found it easy to talk to her about any topic. Only a few days had passed, but I already felt as if I had known her for a long time. We corresponded constantly, and I looked forward to each new message from her. She was an interesting conversationalist, open and straightforward, which I really liked. Jane worked as a waitress in a bar, and even though she had a busy schedule, she always found time to keep up our conversation. A few days after we started talking, I felt like I wanted to meet her in real life. So I invited her to meet me at a cafe in the city center. I was a little nervous because I thought that our communication in person might be different. But when we met, all my doubts disappeared. Jane was just as charming and witty as in our correspondence, even more so. We spent a wonderful evening, and I realized that this was just the beginning of something special. Our story developed at lightning speed. After we met for the first time, I realized that this was not just a casual acquaintance. In a few weeks, we saw each other almost every day, and each meeting only confirmed my feelings for Jane. We walked around the city, had lunch together, laughed, and talked a lot about the future. She was genuine, lively, and witty, and I saw her as someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. A few months after our first meeting, I asked her to marry me. I was a little nervous, but I knew it was the right decision. Jane gladly accepted. We didn't delay the wedding. We organized a small ceremony for friends and family. It was one of the best days of my life. Jane looked stunning in her wedding dress, and I was sure we had created a strong and loving family. After the wedding, we started living together in my house. Jane continued to work as a waitress in a bar, and although I hinted several times that she should find another job or quit altogether, she always replied that she loved her job. She liked to communicate with people, to be active. I worked as an IT specialist and spent most of my time at home at the computer, so I understood that she didn't want to stay at home all day. The first year of our marriage was quite happy. We understood each other and planned our future together. She worked in the evenings and I worked during the day, so we spent time together only in the morning or late at night. Sometimes we would go to the movies or to a restaurant for dinner, trying to maintain intimacy and romance in our relationship. However, over time, things started to change. I began to notice that our conversations lost their liveliness and we spent less time together. Her work began to take up more of her time, and when she came home late at night, she seemed tired and distant. I tried to talk to her about it, but Jane assured me that everything was fine. She said she was just tired from work. I tried to support her, thinking it was a temporary difficulty, but I started to feel that something was going wrong. Our relationship changed a bit over time, but I believed that everything could be fixed. I was busy with work, and Jane was working in a bar in the evenings, so we didn't always have the opportunity to spend time together. But when I was invited to a big conference in another state, I decided it was a great opportunity for both of us to take a break from our routine and spend some time together. One night at dinner, I proposed, "Jane, I have an opportunity to go to a conference for a few days. It will be in another city, so I was wondering if you would like to come with me. We can spend time together after my talks, walks, new places, a good vacation. How does that sound?" She smiled thoughtfully, as if considering the proposal. "Oh, that sounds interesting," she said, "but I'm not sure I can leave work for a few days. Besides, you'll be busy at the conference, and I'll probably get bored while you're speaking." I tried to convince her. "But this is a great opportunity to spend some time together. After my speeches, we could go for a walk around the city, have dinner in new places. It would be like a little vacation." She looked at me with warm eyes and answered, "That's a very nice offer, but I think I'd rather stay home and do some things I've been putting off for a long time. You know how much I have to do. Besides, when you come back, we'll have time to celebrate your success at the conference." Her response was full of warmth and care, and I didn't feel anything suspicious. She wanted to support me and didn't seem to have any bad intentions. I nodded and said, "Okay, then I'll go alone, but I'll be sure to bring you something interesting from my trip." She smiled, and that moment gave me back my confidence that we were just going through a normal period in our relationship and that everything could be fixed. I was full of optimism and glad that after the trip we would have time for new experiences and moments together. I continued preparing for the conference with a light heart. Jane's refusal did not cause anxiety, because she explained everything in such a way that I understood her desire to stay home. We still had room in our lives to care for each other, and I believed that these few days apart would allow us to recuperate and get back to our normal relationship. I was full of hope that after the conference, we would be able to enjoy our time together again. The conference was important to me, and I was looking forward to it because it was an opportunity not only to develop professionally, but also to change the environment a bit. I gathered all the necessary materials, prepared my reports, and went to the airport early in the morning, ready to travel. But when I arrived at the airport, something unexpected happened. My flight was canceled due to technical problems with the plane. I tried to find another flight, but quickly realized that I would not be able to arrive at the conference on time on the next flight. I felt bad that all my plans had been thwarted. I sat at the airport, weighing all my options. I could stay here and fly back the next day, but then the conference would be meaningless. I made an unexpected decision. If I couldn't make it to the conference, why not go home and surprise Jane? I liked the idea of coming home early, because she was definitely not expecting me that evening. I imagined her surprise and joy when she saw me on the doorstep. Usually I don't do such spontaneous things, but this time I decided it was a good opportunity to spend an unexpected evening with her. I took a taxi straight from the airport and headed home. When I arrived at our house, it was already getting dark. The lights were on in the windows, and I thought Jane must be home from work. I quietly opened the door, trying not to make any noise so that the surprise would be successful. But already at the entrance, something seemed strange. There was a pair of men's shoes I had never seen before. My joy at the surprise quickly turned to anxiety. I slowly walked to the living room, but there was no one there. There was a silence in the house that seemed too loud. My heart was pounding. I headed for the bedroom, where I could hear faint sounds coming from. As I walked to the door and gently opened it, I saw something that changed my life forever. Jane was in bed with another man, and it was none other than the bartender from her job. I was in shock. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice me entering the room. It looked like everything was happening in slow motion. My wife had betrayed me, and I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt like the ground had slipped from under my feet. What the hell is going on here? My words broke through the silence like a bolt from the blue. Jane jumped up in bed, her face instantly turning white. She tried to say something, but couldn't get a word out. I stood in the doorway looking at Jane and her lover. The bartender quickly picked up his clothes and ran out of the room, not even trying to explain. Only Jane and I were left. She was sitting on the bed, hugging the blanket to her, looking confused. I stood there motionless, trying to realize what I had just seen. My heart was beating frantically, and my mind was racing with thousands of thoughts. But one of them was louder than all the others. I had to get answers. "Why?" I asked, my words coming out with difficulty and pain. Jane was silent, her head down, as if she didn't know how to begin. I stood there waiting. Finally, she sighed and whispered, "I don't know how to explain this to you. Just tell me the truth. My voice became harsher, although I tried to restrain myself. She raised her head a little and looked at me. Her eyes were full of tears, but I could no longer sympathize. She had betrayed me, and now I wanted to hear how and why it all happened. It lasted a month, she said in a trembling voice. I didn't plan it, it just happened. A month. She was cheating on me for a month, and I didn't even realize it. I could feel the anger and frustration rising inside me. And why did you do that? I couldn't hold back my anger any longer. We were married. What made you do this? Jane lowered her head again, as if searching for words. We're very different, she began. At first it was fine, but over time, I realized that we just weren't right for each other. You work all the time. You live in your world of computers. You're always busy with work. And I know it's important to you. I appreciate it, but I want more. I want a live relationship, more emotions. I like to laugh, to be among people. And you are always immersed in yourself, in your work. She swallowed back tears and continued. I began to feel that we do not understand each other. Over time, it became unbearable. And then he came along. Her voice trembled as she mentioned the bartender. He gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. We could be together, laugh, be happy. And I'm confused. I stood there listening to her words, my heart clenching with pain. Her words sounded like knives that were cutting deeper with each passing minute. I couldn't believe that this was the love we had been fighting for all these years. I gave her everything I could, and she chose someone else because I was too boring for her. So you decided to betray me because I wasn't as fun as you wanted? I could barely contain my anger. You could have talked to me instead of going behind my back and lying to me for a month. She pressed her hands to her face and began to sob. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I didn't know how to tell you. I was afraid you wouldn't understand. Understand? I shook my head, not believing my ears. How am I supposed to understand? You never gave me a chance. You lied to me while I thought we were just going through a normal period in our marriage. Silence hung between us. Jane didn't know what to say, and I stood there, torn between wanting to just walk away and leave it all behind and needing to understand how we got to this point. I can't take it anymore, she finally said quietly. I feel like I don't love you the way I used to. I hoped it would pass, but I was wrong. These words hit harder than anything she had said before. I stood there, feeling our relationship crumble right before my eyes. I want a divorce, I said quietly, no longer looking at her. We can't go on like this. I can't live in a lie. She just nodded, and in that moment, I realized that our marriage was really over. After that conversation, a silence fell between us, heavy and tense. Jane sat on the bed, wiping away her tears, and I stood there, feeling our story coming to an end. I no longer had the strength to stay in this house, in these walls that now seemed alien. I had to leave. I looked at her one last time, and there was no anger in my voice, only cold calm. In the morning, when I come back, you must not be here. Pack your things and leave. Don't leave your keys anywhere, because I will change the locks. She didn't answer, she just nodded, completely shattered by what had happened. I realized that she felt guilty, but I didn't care anymore. What was between us was over. I left the room, grabbed a few things, and went to my friend's place. You need time to process this, he said when I told him what had happened. He was shocked, but he took me in without any questions. I spent the night on his couch, but even in a calm environment, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept returning to Jane, to how everything had gone wrong, and to the fact that there was no turning back. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to accept the reality that was in front of me. In the morning, I returned home. Jane was no longer there. Her things were gone, and the house seemed empty, too quiet. She had fulfilled my request, taken everything, and left without leaving a trace. I looked through all the rooms, as if looking for at least some reminder that she was a part of my life. But there was nothing left. There were no house keys either, as I had asked for. Right after that, I went to the locksmith to change the locks. Now this house belonged only to me, and I wanted to get rid of all the memories associated with it. It was the beginning of a new phase. We broke up quickly. Jane did not resist. She probably realized that there was nothing to fix. Our signatures on the papers were the last point in our marriage. I never saw her again from that moment on. She simply disappeared from my life, leaving a void that I now had to fill with something new. A few weeks passed, and I started to get used to life without her. It was hard, but at the same time, I was gradually relieved. I was no longer the man who was betrayed. I was a man who was able to let go of the past and move on. It was hard at first, and the house we once shared with Jane seemed empty and cold. But over time, I began to notice changes in myself. Without her presence, I began to pay more attention to my own life, my needs and desires, which I hadn't had time for before. I returned to my hobbies, reconnected with friends I had once neglected because of work. Gradually, I began to find joy in the little things that once seemed unimportant to me. Freedom from relationships and constant tension was a relief. Work also began to bring more pleasure, because now I didn't feel guilty about spending a lot of time at the computer. I was able to combine my professional ambitions with new goals in my personal life. I discovered new places, met new people, and even started traveling. In the end, I realized that what happened was a necessary stage in my life. The betrayal hurt, but it opened the way for me to something better. I realized that life does not end because of a breakup, but rather a new, interesting chapter begins. My relationship with Jane may have ended, but I found something much more valuable. I found myself. And now I'm ready to move on without looking back. New opportunities awaited me, and I was sure that this chapter of my life would become even brighter.